Okay, I'd like to welcome our next speaker, Dr. Dan Thompson from Iowa State University. Dr. Thompson is at the College of Agriculture and Life Science and the Department of Animal Science and a department chair and professor of animal science. He's a recognized internationally as a leader in animal welfare, beef production, and cattle health management. We welcome Dr. Dan Thompson.
Well, hey there, and thanks for having me. It was great to listen and hear my friend Janice Swanson, who we met at Kansas State, and she was on the interview committee that brought me to Kansas State, which I spent 16 years on the faculty at the College of Veterinary Medicine at Kansas State, and still own 2 businesses in Kansas. So, and I have 3 of my 4 daughters that live in Kansas, 2 in Manhattan and 1 that'll finish med school at KU Med in May. So Kansas is home to us, and that's where Cindy and I plan to retire. So I'm going to talk a little bit today about just kind of as my journey in faith and understanding of how some of these dynamics all interplay. And the title is Wealth and Poverty, Obesity and Hunger. And it'll become a little bit more apparent, but as I work with the OIE and as I work with global organizations, 75% of the countries in the world are third world or developing countries. And as we in the United States are wealthy and affluent, to have different problems than what some of our neighbors around the world. So we'll talk a little bit about that journey. I spend time as a lay minister, and actually I covered the churches. I'm a Methodist, and I covered Methodist at Keats and Riley, Kansas, and but as we think about this food production system, as we think about, and I'm going to talk a lot about beef because that's what I do. I'm a bovine veterinarian and nutritionist and welfare specialist. But, bring the fatted calf and kill it. Beef has been, the thing I want to drive home is that from our biggest celebrations to just comfort food, beef serves all socioeconomic strata in this country. It also is something that we use to celebrate with. When someone gets a raise, they don't say, hey, let's run down to the restaurant and get a sprig of broccoli. They say, we're going out tonight and we're going to celebrate and we're going to have a feast and we're going to celebrate. And so not only do we use it to celebrate, not only is beef put on the white tablecloth restaurants, but if you look here at what our SNAP expenditures and non-SNAP expenditures in the United States are, SNAP would be food stamps, all right, for the lack of a better term. And if you look at 2016 food stamp expenditures in grocery stores, the number 3 expenditure was on ground beef. I know everybody always points to number 1 is soft drinks and number 2 is milk. We drink a lot of pop in this country, right? And on the right side of this are SNAP or non-food stamp expenditures in grocery stores, so people paying cash or credit card. Doesn't change a whole lot at the top, but understanding that ground beef is a staple that feeds everyone from those that can't take care of themselves, that we all support and help, to those that are celebrating in some of the finest restaurants in the country. So it's a big job. And understanding this is important. And I always point out that milk, all dairy cows become hamburger eventually. So, well, maybe not all of them, but the ones that are cold do. So I kind of lump that together in a big job with beef production. But understanding this, I think, is important. So some of the key points that we'll talk about today is that consumers need to educate on all aspects of food production, including food security. there are many activists out there that are very misleading about agriculture, and they have goals, as mentioned by one of the guests, about abolishing animal agriculture. And so they try to use things such as welfare or antibiotics or environmental stewardship, things that we all care about. Nobody cares more about environmental stewardship than the people that live on the land that the animals are inhabiting. So changing their tactics to create a loss of trust between the farmers and ranchers and the consumers, or the farmers and ranchers and the retailers of meat products. Conventionally raised food is safe, wholesome, and nutritious, and so are natural and organic. And we'll talk a little bit about that. One thing that concerns me is that sometimes we can have quick decisions by retailers because of activist pressure, and they don't understand the ramifications of what that could have against food insecurity in our country. And that's the reason why I think we, as Americans, need to call on USDA and FDA to provide needed leadership and be the mediator and make the decisions on this. So why do we have a lot of these issues on farm and ranch? And part of it is just the fear of the uninformed or unknown. And people, we have this human animal bond. And the human animal bond has, more and more people have pets. More and more people have animals for companionship. And as we increase companionship with animals, and we are further removed from the farm, it's harder for people to have a concept that our intent from the time we put the bull in the pasture with the cows, the intent from that point forward is to produce food, not a 1,500-pound lapdog, not a pet. It is food production, global food production, and local food production. Consumers and their lack of attachment. When I ask somebody where'd that milk come from, they're going to say the store. They're going to say the Walmart. They're not going to say a farm, a cow, a farmer. They don't have the concept that they have lost attachment with where food is produced and where it comes from. And so we now have to spend more and more time educating a consumer on how food's produced, because fewer and fewer people are engaged. 2% of Americans feed 100%. 2% of Americans are engaged in agriculture day to day. Less than a century ago, 50% of Americans were involved in agriculture. So we didn't have to educate. Every other person in line at the football game on a Friday night understood and was engaged in our industry. Now, as we become further and further detached with fewer and fewer people involved, it becomes imperative that we start to teach at a young age the importance of food animal production and its relevant role in feeding a growing global population. Another reason why we have the issues is because we're blessed to have these issues. We live in a first world country. And as I mentioned earlier, there's many countries that are developing or third world. And they say a person whose belly is half full has many problems. But a person who's starving's got but one. And as we look at our country, as we are so fortunate to be able to argue about the things that we get to argue about and the things that we think are big problems, because we have our bellies half full. As we look at it's kind of a weird dichotomy across our country. And we'll talk about food insecurity and we'll talk about growing global hunger. But the thing is that food is basically free in our country because we spend so little. 6% of our personal income is spent on food at home, and I'll show you a little bit about that. We also have a huge obesity problem in our country. And the graph there by the CDC, that's 2010. You don't want to see the 2020 graph, because now we're looking at states that have populations of obesity of 35 to 40% of the adult population is considered obese. And then we waste a lot of food. The graph up above there is a study done at K-State, and They looked at how much food students would take at dining services and then how much they'd scrape. And they would scrape a quarter pound of breakfast. They would throw away a third of a pound of lunch and a half a pound of dinner. And scraping that pound of food that was valued at $5 a pound times the 14,000 students, that's 14,000 pounds or 7 tons of food thrown away just in the K-State dining services every day. We have it so good. We are so blessed as we think forward. And I hear a lot of people say, well, the reason why we spend so little of money on food at home is because we just eat out more. And this is a graph that I got from USDA looking at, you can see that from 1960 to 2014, we have decreased the total price of food per percent of income from 17% down to about 10%. And we have decreased the amount of money spent on food at the house from 14% down to 6%. But since Moby Dick was a minnow, actually this goes back to the 1920s, the United States citizen has spent 4% of their personal income on food at restaurants. And so that alone sets the bar that restaurants understand there is a captive amount of food that is going to be consumed at their restaurants, okay? So if a new niche or a new restaurant comes in and they start to eat into that 4%, another restaurant's going to lose market share or going to lose income. So I bring this up because retailers such as restaurants do not feed the masses. You cannot use a food stamp or a SNAP coupon at a restaurant. And I don't care if it's McDonald's or Taco Bell or your cafe in town. People that eat at restaurants have the money to afford to have someone else plan the meal, cook the meal, and do the dishes. They're selling a service plus the food. Grocery stores, on the other hand, feed the masses. And I think it was quite obvious during COVID when all of a sudden our grocery store shelves were empty and hamburger was gone and ground pork was gone and comfort food and things that we learned how to cook at home again were missing, because that's where people went when they just needed to be fed and they needed to be secluded. And so restaurants really are a luxury, but yet they set a lot of the policy, and that's where the activists set, because they're the ones that are advertising the food. Now, I don't discount the retailers because they're part of the beef industry, the chicken and the poultry industry, the egg industry, the turkey industry. And they say the greatest distance between two people is the last 3 feet. And the retailer, whether it's the grocer or the restaurant, are the last 3 feet between farming and agriculture and the consumer. So we all have to work together, and we have to understand this. So society and food animal production is at a tipping point, just like everything else. It seems like I spoke to our president of the university, and I think the rest of the country is just catching up with what my grandpa used to do at the hog buying station. Is they'd sit there and drink coffee and talk about the neighbor, how they were farming their land, or how they're not getting their pens cleaned, or what kind of rickety old tractor they were using. Now we just do it on a national scope, and we do it out in public, whether it's a sports commentator that's always criticizing a player or a coach, or whether it's cable news dissecting every decision that is made. It's just really, really, disheartening, because it seems as though nobody really wants to spend time to get to the truth. Nobody wants to spend time. They just want to hit their angle. They just want to put this forward. And so society has to make some decisions. Society's going to have to start to think deeper than the soundbite. And we can't just jump on something that just feels good. We have to take a deep seat on this. Sustainability, as Janice mentioned, it's hard for me to imagine that someone who lives in New York City is more concerned about groundwater contamination than that picture of my daughter sitting there fishing in one of our ponds, or the well that we drank out of on our farm. Sustainability has many different definitions, and we always tend to gravitate towards the environmental definition. But sustainability really is about, are we going to be around in 30 or 40 years? Can we sustain this? And my definition of sustainability is leaving a little bit better than we found it. And whether it's healthy cattle, a healthy planet, or the healthy people, food safety and security, environmental stewardship, animal welfare, and if the consumer asks us to do something and it increases our external inputs, the farmer and rancher has to have increased income, because without profitability, there will be no sustainability. We don't do this as a hobby. This is not gardening. This is not raising chickens in the backyard. This is feeding a growing global population. And so having an understanding of this is important. I got asked to come to Washington, D.C. and speak on this, and I'm not a sustainability expert. So as I thought about this and I went in there, I gave them kind of my country, Riley County view of, it seems as though every time you get into an argument about sustainability, everybody spins it up to, we have to save mankind. Well, I have 4 daughters, and I don't know how many times we watch Miss Congeniality, but every contestant in the beauty pageant, when asked a question, the answer was always world peace, right? And so the default in the argument on sustainability is saving the globe and global warming. Well, that's too big for my brain to wrap around. I have to have things a little more, understand. Do we want to sustain our country? Do you want to sustain your business? Do you want to sustain your family? And at the end of the day, in countries like ours, where we have a lot of luxury, the thing we really want to sustain is ourselves and our selfish worldly interests, rather than just wanting to help, save the planet. Because McDonald's and different groups, they really are just trying to use sustainability to predict who are doing the right practices when it comes to raising animals, and who they can predict will be in business based on those practices in 50 or 60 years, because they really just want to sell hamburgers and French fries. So I guess at the end of the day, my thoughts is that global climate change will have a more impact on agriculture than agriculture will ever have on global climate change. Meaning that we are going to have global warming. We are going to have climate change, and it's going to change the crops. It's going to change where we raise animals, and it doesn't understand state or country boundaries or fence boundaries. And so we have to treat our neighbors well now. We're really good at producing food. We stink at distributing it. And we have to be good neighbors now, because we may not be the one, our great grandkids may not be the ones that have the place that's the best place for farming, because you're going to see global change, water availability, disease, population centers, and tastes. All of this will change. Therefore, food production will change. And then, speaking of change, I had a person stand up and show me the Impossible Burger, right? A plant-based protein burger. And she held it in front of me and said, "This is better for the environment." And I said, "Do you really think cows are bad for the environment?" And she said, "Absolutely." And I said, "Well, then I would think you'd want us to eat them all." I don't know what we're going to do if we quit eating them. India has the second largest cow herd in the world because they don't eat them. And I don't think we're going to ride around and shoot them. And so having an understanding and a deeper presence and that as we move forward. And I'm not going to apologize for proper animal husbandry and for making sure that cattle are vaccinated, that we provide them nutrition, and that when they're sick or lame, we bring them in. We do a great job of raising animals, and we do a great job of animal welfare and health. And so we have people that are driving a wedge, though, right? Some of these activists are driving a wedge. So audits are going to increase in agriculture, because as you look at this, Stephen Covey Jr. Wrote a book called The Speed of Trust. And in that book, as trust erodes, the cost of business goes up and the speed of business slows down, which means we're going to do audits, we're going to verify, and that's going to increase the cost of production, because in the realm of some of these activist groups, They want to refine, reduce, and replace animal protein in the diets. And one way to refine it is through laws and through audits and guidelines that Janice and I have sat on so many committees and worked on these to help farmers and ranchers. And then reduce is anything we can do to increase the cost. Because if we increase the cost of production, which increases the cost in the meat counter, it's going to reduce the consumption of the product. And the last one is replace. I don't think that we'll ever get there, but it's something that we have to consider. Animal welfare is not about checking a box. Animal welfare is about a culture. It's no different. Our country spends $1 billion a year on standardized testing in schools, because that is a form of an audit, right? We have said we're going to be this smart. And guess what? Our teachers teach to the test. A lot of times a person's dead level best is exactly what they can get away with. And as we look at this and we look at setting a bar for welfare, then we start to reduce the person's creativity and drive to go beyond that. We just set the hurdle. I don't need an audit to walk into this classroom with, and tell you which one of these classes had a better learning environment, the top or the bottom on the left. And as we look at standardized testing, $1 billion a year, our test scores have not gone up nor gone down over the last decade, because we said we're going to be this smart and that's okay. The schools that increase their test scores are not the ones that offer more English. They're not the ones that offer more math. They're the ones that have adopted core values in their school system of accountability, of holding each other accountable. If I'm accountable, I'll learn my English. The importance of that. As we start to look at animal welfare and sustainability, farmers and ranchers that hold themselves accountable for doing the right thing every day, which is 90%, 99% of the people in the business, I don't need audits and assessments, but we're stuck with them, okay? Janice mentioned this. We both work with McDonald's in different groups, but when asked globally what is animal welfare, people say a safe food product comes from a healthy animal, and a healthy animal is one that had good animal welfare. So health, animal health, is what is a core indicator of animal welfare globally. Now let's shift gears, because antibiotics are under scrutiny, right? And everybody's worried about antibiotic use and the creation of a superbug. A little bit of that dropped down, because now we found out that there's viruses and prions and different things like COVID that probably have a bigger threat to the growing global population than antibiotic resistance, especially from farm animals. But when you look at, and you look at where I say beef cows, dairy cows, market steers, these are the percentages of carcasses tested by FSIS in packing plants in 2010. These are the percentage of carcasses that had no residue, no antibiotic residue when they came through. So when you start to look at beef cattle, 99.89, dairy cows, 99.85, market steers, 99.94, market heifers, 100%. Not one animal they tested in 2010, one heifer, had any antibiotic residues. We do a phenomenal job of preventing antimicrobial residues, okay? Because the veterinarians are working with the producers. We have withdrawals, we have FDA, we have so many tools. We just do a great job, okay? Now, antibiotic resistance is different than antibiotic residues. Antibiotic resistance is I treat an animal with an antibiotic. The bacteria have to be exposed to that antibiotic, like Salmonella or E. coli. Then they become resistant. Then we consume it, and we get a foodborne pathogen. The other one is urinary tract infections in females, because that is a fecal contamination issue, okay? But what I want you to understand is not only do we have a great system for preventing residues, we have a great system for preventing resistance. In the feedlot there outside of Salina, I would have to have a veterinary client-patient relationship, which would give me case definition and treatment protocols to use antibiotics on my farm. The FDA approves these antibiotics. And then we have jurisprudence in the state of Kansas that says, hey, you have the proper relationship with the producer as a veterinarian to prescribe antibiotics. You know what their operation is, and you're available for an emergency. Then when the animal is shipped from the feed yard that goes to the packing plant, the USDA and FSIS do an anti-mortem inspection as the animals come off the truck looking for injuries or sickness. And then we have a post-mortem inspection, looking at lymph nodes, looking at carcass, looking at defect. And every tote of beef before it is sent out of that packing plant is tested for antimicrobial contamination or microbial contamination, Salmonella, E. coli, Campylobacter. Then it goes to a grinder for hamburger, again, USDA testing and microbiological testing before it's shipped to the restaurant. And you think, well, then it's done, right? No, that's when the state Department of Agriculture kicks in and goes to restaurants and makes sure it's being stored properly, making sure it's being cooked properly, making sure employees are washing their hands, so on and so forth. So do you think that the chance, how many of y'all, when you swung in to get lunch today and you had your sandwich with turkey on it or chicken or beef, thought, oh boy, I hope I don't get salmonella from this, or oh boy, I hope I don't get E. coli? None. So not only do you have to consume the foodborne pathogen, but it also has to be resistant for what we're talking about. So the chance is extremely slim. And I put this graph, I've used this slide for 15 years. And I keep putting it up there because who would have thunk when I put this up there 15 years ago, we'd all be wearing masks and going through what we did with COVID, like you can see here with this Southeast Asia father and daughter. But what I try to get to when people say, well, if we're going to have a superbug from antimicrobial resistance, it's going to come from a peri-urban area of one of our underdeveloped countries that has no regulation, meaning that some of these countries that have no veterinarians, they have no FDA, they have no USDA, they have no inspection of animals, they have no regulation of antibiotics, and people live with the animals that they eat. It makes sense, right? What I don't hear in the US is if it's where we are living with the animals, I don't see the controversy. If I was going to worry about antimicrobial resistance transmission from animals to humans, if you bring a puppy into me with a red itchy tummy, I'm going to treat it with cefalexin and prednisone and send it home. And it's going to be on antibiotics in your house with your children, and then it's going to groom itself, and then it's going to lick your child on the face. That's a lot quicker transmission of antimicrobial resistant bacteria, but yet that's not a big problem in the US. That's not discussed at a high level. It's drilling back down to the truth. It's drilling back down to what truly matters. Our consumer wants to see continuous improvement. Yeah, they want innovation, they want this, but they just want to know, are the farmers and ranchers doing a better job today than they were yesterday? As Coach Snyder would say, we're going to be a little bit better tomorrow than we were today. That's what we continually do. And we do. We have gone from beef quality assurance to the extra labeled drug usage to US Fair Ad to a voluntary ban on aminoglycosides in the beef industry. In 2017, we had a veterinary feed directive that no longer allows feed grade antibiotics to be used without a prescription. And in 2022, we're going to start to have no antibiotics over the counter at the farm stores. So we have continuous improvement. We have continuous striving to constantly get better. And we have a great story to tell. And I hear people say, well, you got to eat natural and organic. And I just want to let you know, if you produce natural and organic animals or meat, I'm for you. If you consume it and you seek it out and you buy it, I'm for you. Okay. If you want to eat cardboard, it's your life. I'm for you. When I have a problem is when someone tells me that the food that is raised conventionally that I put on the table for my daughters and my wife and I is not as safe, not as healthy, not as wholesome, not as nutritious, and not as safe, because that's just not true. Whether it's American Dietitian Association that says organic foods differ from conventional foods only in the way in which they're grown and processed, or whether it's the American Journal of Clinical Nutrition that says there's no evidence of a difference in nutrient quality between organically and conventionally produced foodstuffs, or the USDA that says no distinctions should be made between organic and non-organic in terms of quality, appearance, or safety. That's what's important. Janice touched on steroid implants. You've heard people say, well, I don't want to eat the hormones that are in beef. Well, this was a study that was done by Dan Loy, and I put this on an 8-ounce serving, so you could see nanograms of estrogenic activity here per 8-ounce steak. And as you can see, that beef from a non-implanted, an 8-ounce steak from a non-implanted steer, organic and natural, has 2 nanograms of estrogen. An 8-ounce steak from one that we use steroid implants had 3. A nanogram per kilogram is equivalent to a blade of grass on a football field. If you ate 8 ounces of soy protein, you will consume 51 million nanograms of estrogenic activity. Now, what does this relate to in people? These are my 4 daughters, and y'all may have seen Kelly. She played basketball at K-State, and Caitlin played at Cloud County up at Concordia. And we traveled the state playing basketball all over. But anyway, we're at Riley County. But I don't know a lot about a lot of things in life, but one thing I do have a pretty good handle on living with these 5 for 20-some years is I understand estrogen, okay? Now, a pregnant woman produces 19 million nanograms of estrogen a day. A non-pregnant woman, 500,000. And we're going to throw away something that improves feed efficiency and decreases our carbon footprint significantly over a blade of grass on a football field or 1 nanogram of estrogenic activity per 8-ounce steak. I don't think so. In this graph, what I want you to understand is the maroon graph, as you go to the outside, it's an improvement, okay? So the gold bar on the middle is all of these points relative to published literature, and then the maroon one is how this changes when we use steroid implants. So when we use steroid implants, it doesn't do anything to change animal health. It doesn't do anything to influence food safety, and it does nothing to influence antibiotic usage. However, when we use steroid implants, it decreases the expense or the cost of producing that animal. It increases the income because we have more pounds to sell. It decreases greenhouse gas production, it decreases water usage, and it increases the quantity of food present. We have to look at these things holistically. We have to go and dig for the truth. When you look at how much more it costs to produce a natural or organic steer versus a conventionally raised steer, natural beef costs you $100 to $200 per head more, and organic costs you $450 to $600 per head more than conventionally raised beef. And at the end of the day, when we went and we looked at different grocery stores and organic versus conventional, on average, you'll increase your grocery budget by 68% for something that's not safer, not more wholesome, not more nutritious. The thing I'm trying to drive home is this has a big impact on society. And I'll show you some things here as we move forward. Because there's 2 groups out there that don't care about science and food, okay? The rich, because they can just err to the side of safety, and the poor, because they just want to eat. And when I signed up to work in agriculture and spend my career, I didn't sign up just to feed the rich and the famous. I signed up to be a neighbor that was going to help provide food and sustain people's bodies globally and specifically in my communities. When we look at organic consumers, this is from the USDA, and this is a quote: from preliminary results, Caucasians that are well educated with higher incomes are the most likely market sector to focus marketing organic vegetables to. When we talk about diversity, equity, and inclusion, the socioeconomic strain that some of these decisions make really puts a hamper on mental and physical development of our children. And some of these movie stars that come out and don't have a clue. They think that they're hurting farmers and ranchers, right? And I just say, you know what? We're used to it. In agriculture, you can kick us. You can tell us that we're using antibiotics too much because our animals are in non-hygienic operations, or in you can tell us that we mistreat our animals. We don't. You can tell us that we're trying to wreck the environment. We're not. And you can keep kicking us because we've been kicked for centuries. Okay. But guess what? We're going to get up tomorrow humbly and eat our breakfast, and we're going to go out and take care of the animals that God entitled us to take care of and put in our care. And we're going to feed our neighbors. The people that they're hurting are the people that are so close to poverty that we increase the price of food, which makes it less available for people. And they don't get it. They don't understand who these are. Norman Borlaug, the father of the Green Revolution, said, to feed our growing global population, we'll have to produce the same amount of food the next 40 years as we have produced the last 10,000. We're at 7.5 billion people. We're headed to 9 billion on this planet. It is going to increase. Thomas Malthus, who is the father of populations and the Malthusian catastrophe, is when could it happen? The point in time in which our growing global population would outgrow our ability to use natural resources to feed it, and we would start to see a climb. His middle estimate that the United Nations uses was 2030. And you know, that's not far away. And so as we start to think about this, and as we start to think about 2030, 2050, 2100, and what we're going to leave behind, we've got to get this right. We've got to continue to move forward. So this is a graph that shows you that last year the median household income in the United States was $50,000. Okay, now the median household income is 4 people with 2 salaries. So the per capita income or per person income is half of that, 25,000. Okay. Now, if you look at the median household income, and you look at the red dashed line, and you look at what any of these households below 50,000, below 25,000, $25,000 on a household of 4 with 2 incomes, 2 adults and 2 incomes, that is the line of poverty in the United States. So 25% of Americans today, 25% of the households live in poverty. Now, the only variable since 1960s to be used to determine poverty is the price of food. So if we do things that increase the food prices without science, without an understanding of the truth, but we don't increase incomes, what's that going to do to the level of poverty in this country? It's going to increase. If you and your partner or you and your spouse make over $100,000 a year in combined incomes, you are in the top 20% of incomes in our country. I think we have forgotten how little of money most people live on. And as you are a faith-based group, I'm a very, very strong spiritual and faith-based person. I'm looking out for how are we going to feed children? How are we going to feed people in the world? And having an understanding of how little most people have is extremely important. This is a graph on food insecurity, and food insecurity is when people can't produce enough food to put on the table to sustain themselves. And on average in the United States today, 14.5% of Americans suffer from food insecurity. Now, there are some populations of people that have higher food insecurity. One thing that there's no difference in food insecurity in urban or rural settings, meaning there's just as much hunger in Salina, Kansas, or in Beloit, or in Riley as there is in Kansas City. or in Detroit, Michigan. The difference is there's just a lot more people living in those big urban areas, okay? But our neighbors in our small communities are suffering as well. One of the largest populations or the largest demographic for food insecurity is a single mom with children. 35% food insecurity, okay? There are ethnic groups. African American and Hispanic communities have higher levels of food insecurity than Anglo or Caucasian. Okay, so understanding diversity, equity, and inclusion. Some of these things that we think are being done, you know, are just all right. Have a little thing outside there. Okay, so we have to understand that if we're for diversity, this means about food production. This means about making decisions on welfare, on antibiotics, on stewardship, on environmental, not just about our wishes, but also understanding how that's going to influence people that are our neighbors. It's hard for me to explain. This is a cross section of two chickens. This is a broiler from 2009 versus a broiler from 1957. It's pretty hard for me to tell a single mom with two children that, you know what, we just feel better in society going back to the way that we raised the animal in 1957, where it takes us 3 times the amount of time to get a chick to slaughter, where the bird weighs half as much and it takes twice the natural resources. It'd be the opposite of what we'd pick out in a car, isn't it? What if the automobile industry said, you know, we're going to go back to 1970 F100 3 on the tree half ton, and we're going to give you, you're going to go pull your trailer down I-70. Now we've got not only these 3/4 tons and set to cruise and nice Bose stereos and heated seats and air conditioning. It's just, you know, it's just amazing to me what the misinformation and misguidedness on some of these issues. And when I talk about diversity and inclusion, you know, farming and ranching is the melting pot of the world. We produce what man cannot live without. And everybody, when they immigrate to this country, regardless of gender, regardless of, you know, in our Christian values, race, color of skin, gender, creed, none of that matters. And this is a place we all gather on the farms, in the ranches, in the packing plants. And when you go there, I keep telling people at the university, it's not something we talk about in agriculture. It's what we do every day. We love our neighbor. We work together. We solve problems, and we take care of the animals that were entrusted in us. And I'll wrap up with this. Gandhi said there's enough for everyone's needs, but not enough for everyone's greeds. And Bill Gates says if we can spend the early decades of the 21st century finding approaches that meets the needs of the poor in ways that generates profit and recognition for businesses, we'll have found a sustainable way forward to reduce poverty in the world. I can't tell you how many times at the university, how many awards people are put up for and things to that nature, these worldly and ordeals. And we have a bigger cause. We have a bigger mission. Our mission is to help protect ranchers, farmers, ranchers, keeping Main Street open in rural communities, because they are the economic engine of our country, and they are what is going to help feed a growing global population. We have to protect human and animal health, evidence-based practices, and it's going to take all of us. This isn't an agriculture issue. This is an if you eat issue. This is if you love your neighbor issue. We have the best system in the world. We can't afford to lose it. And I'll leave with this. We need strong, humane leadership to make sure that our country does not undo all the good we have done for so many, and what our founding fathers have done to give us the life that we have. The picture, the painting in the middle is called On Bent Knee. It's my favorite painting. It was painted by Kenneth Wyatt out of Tulia, Texas. where he is a cowboy and a painter. His studio's right there in his home, and I used to go there after I'd go to Wrangler Feed Yard, and it just kind of is the epitome of agriculture, grocery stores, of people that work so hard to do so much for so many. So with that, Mary, I'll entertain any questions.
Thank you, Dan. And Art, do you want to MC with the microphone like you did before? That worked pretty well. I know you couldn't hear us, but there was a fair amount of chuckling at the old F-100 and the 3 on the tree in the room.
Well, I bought one of those when I was in grad school at Texas Tech years ago for $200, and I drove it for 3 years and sold it for $600. So I'm pretty partial.
Testing.
Okay, we got you.
Okay. As a 4th or 5th generation beef producer, we're inundated with the no hormones, no antibiotics, no this, no that, grazed beef, many other. But the market, we feel like we're inundated by the people. We have to produce what they want, but it's like the people that want to get rid of animal agriculture are the ones that are actually pulling the strings behind everything else. And it gets very frustrating for us, and we don't know which way to go. And I just would like to thank you for standing up for us at the times when you get to have the microphone in places that are a lot bigger than this. So I want to thank you for that, and see whatever comments you might have on that.
Well, I appreciate it. And really, what we really strive for and what we think about is that you know you have to drop your ego. You have to drop your the worldly greed for a moment, and it really gets back to how we serve others through food production. And I don't know, you always feel outnumbered. But I think it comes back to we've taken this on as a fight as agriculture alone, and it's not. And I would think that our leadership in our churches, our leadership in some of our groups like the NAACP and the Hispanic Chamber of Commerce and the Teamsters unions, that we all come together to support food production and strife in the world. And instead of having these animal rights activists or these antibiotic activists or different things like that, I think if we all walked in the room together to Senator Moran or Senator Marshall or people that are leaders in our country, holding hand to hand, but we just haven't been fighting a good fight. We just think that we in agriculture are going to take it on, and we're going to prove that we do everything right and things of that nature. And really what we need to do is we need to get everybody involved, because if we increase the cost of food without increasing incomes, we continue to see social inequality in income. This is really not just about standing up for farmers and ranchers. This is about standing up for 50% of Americans that are having a tough time making ends meet. And that's where we've got to get to. And we need to employ them with our cause, and we need to educate those. Instead of going out and doing commercials, we need to have targeted discussions within our churches, within our society, and within leadership groups that really carry a lot more weight than animal activists.
Thank you. Is it on? We on? Okay. Thank you again. You hit on something I had never really thought about, is that the more we increase profitable agriculture, both crop and animals, that we really do help the poor. and serve more people throughout the world. And I really appreciate hearing that today. It's another thought that I don't think we talk enough about. The other comment that I was going to make that I find ironic, and you kind of showed it with your estrogen chart there, I find it extremely interesting. I can't think of a night that I haven't watched TV that doesn't promote taking some kind of hormone to make you a better, stronger, healthier person. Every hormone under the sun you can get in pill form, but for God's sakes, don't eat a cow that might have been implanted somewhere. I find that extremely humorous anyway. Thank you.
Yeah, I laugh. I give my cowboy friends a lot of fun because they won't get a vaccine themselves, right? But they'll stick 20 of them in their steer. And I'm like, what the heck? You know, I'm like, I love our farmers and ranchers, and I love being a part of the community, and I love our little ticks. But yeah, when you think about keeping Main Street open, and you think about local option budgets, it's agriculture.
I think one of my concerns has been, when you're a full-time ag producer, you're busy trying to make, take care of everything you have to take care of. And sometimes we don't have the time or pay attention enough to what is, the greater community, or what their concerns are. Just a few years ago, the buzzword was GMO. Okay, so now all of a sudden we had to pay attention to promote that we didn't use GMOs because that was what they didn't want. The consumers didn't want that. But those are the same consumers that all of a sudden we don't hear about GMOs anymore, but now it's all about we're going to eat plant-based meat grown in a petri dish. And why is it, so it's like they changed the goalpost. It's awfully hard to keep up, but we've got to promote agriculture and stand up for what we do, or else we're not going to be here.
Yeah, I think that the one thing that is really important, and I was just really kind of taken back that y'all would take on this topic. I was really pleased that y'all would have this discussion. I think it also shows the importance of organized agriculture, whether it's the Farm Bureau or the KLA, or, I know that people sit there and go, well, they just want my dues, right? They just want my dues. But really, it's about and being informed. And I go down and I tell my neighbors to become part of the egg industry council if they raise eggs, not because I want their dues, but I want them to know what consumers are saying. And somebody asked me, well, what's your job? What the heck do you really do? And I said, that's a good question. But what I think I spend a lot of time is working with retailers to let them know what a good job we do on the farm, and kind of I understand production, and I'm on farms constantly, so that I can explain to them how we do things, and then the other side of that is we have to listen, right? And if the consumer wants something a little different and we can do it, we should. And so I come back and say, hey, instead of hearing someone say, thou shalt do this, I hear them say, if you do this, we can sell more beef, which then increases our profitability, which then increases local option budgets, which then does more for our communities. So I think it's just, we have to raise our voice. We have to join strategic partnerships, but we have to listen.
So just one little comment that I was listening to your presentation, Dan, and that was a quote I heard some time ago, although it's been since I've been back into the farming area, and that is, it's not what we don't know that gets us in trouble. It's what we know that ain't so. And so I think a lot of what you said today, we know, but it's not so.
Will Rogers.
So, Dan, I have a Q&A comment from one of our online participants, Jacob Stanger in Milford, Kansas. And Jacob wants to know if you have any thoughts on where the food dollar goes as it relates to rural America and the American producer. He says affordable food is important, but where that food dollar goes is even more, as we've seen the destruction of rural America and the family farm by the current food policy and Wall Street corporations. We can talk feed the world and sustainable all we want, but if that money doesn't go back into our rural communities, they will be gone.
Yeah, and I see as follow up there that the follow up question is, would the cost of food has increased, but the food dollar to the producer has decreased. Why aren't we addressing the elephant in the room? And I think that it gets back to, these are commodities, right? And when we start to treat them as niche markets and look at different ways to make more money that comes back to the farm, that's great. That's capitalism. And the other part of the reason why it stays lower is because we have subsidy and bailout platforms, because we have to produce food. And so, I understand that, and I'm involved heavily. I feed cattle myself, and having an understanding of there's two things I'll answer this. One, as we see the increase in meat prices and we don't see the increase in the dollar flowing back from the retailer, flowing back from the packer to the feeder, to the cow-calf man, or to the swine producer, or to the poultry or egg producer, it is frustrating. All right, I get that. I think the thing that we're learning is that we will continue to see. I don't think we're going to see the increase in that flow, but I hope we do, because we have to be able to keep people. As I mentioned earlier, if we don't have profitability, we don't have sustainability. And so I think it's vitally important that we address this, but we have to realize too that this is a commodity-based business, and the only groups that stay in business that have the government plan set up right now on animal agriculture is the dairy industry. Dairy producers, there's about 4 or 5 different ways to leverage and have insurance through the government and USDA, and that's the reason why we see 100-cow dairies still competing and making a profit. And so I don't know what it's going to take to bring that type of value back. I do think you're going to see more packers, and you're going to see more local markets and more local lockers spring up, which I think is going to help with this. I'm seeing many of them go into Iowa, and we're seeing smaller to mid-sized packing plants for pigs and for cattle go in. And so as that kind of unfolds and we look at selling food locally, I think that has more potential than anything, than anything I've seen. And I see, Jacob, that you're from Milford, and I miss fishing on Milford Reservoir.
I have a question from me. I participate recently in a working group by the American Society of Nutrition as a representative of the ag production community to essentially a nutrition organization. And we have a working group that's about producing protein to meet humanity's protein needs in the context of a changing environment. And what has struck me in participating in this working group is how polarized this conversation has become. That it is either you are a beef and poultry person or you are a plant protein person. And somehow we've lost a middle ground where you can be an omnivore and have a healthy planet and go forward together as a community. Do you have any thoughts on how to find a middle ground in this conversation?
I think it's got to start in kindergarten. To be honest with you, our country has lost its way in that you're more worried about everybody thinking you're right than you are about truly being right. And we get ourselves trapped in this environment where every kid gets a trophy, and the decisions that are being made and in children's lives. And I shared this with our church, but after the age of 18, that if a person hasn't come to faith, there's a 1 in 8 chance that you will the rest of your life. the decision that these people are making, that we make by age of 13 or 14, or probably even by age 10, and how we're going to live and how we're going to view the world, it's really, really important. And we've got to start setting a better example. I don't think our political leaders and leaders in the country have done a very good job of they spend so much time, and then the video, it's so accessible, right? Whether it's the cable news or whether it's the ESPN or whatever, everybody's pointing out this gotcha and how everybody's wrong, and they could have done it better. And it's just not true, you know? And so I talk with our students to work twice as hard and expect half as much. You know, love your neighbors yourself, and for goodness sakes, let's worry about getting it right, not just about being right.
Thank you. We have another question from the room here. Go ahead.
I just want to make a quick comment after you talked about the local beef and stuff like that. I've been feeding a few beef for family and friends and people in town for years and years and years. And I've gotten, since the pandemic, I've gotten more calls from people asking for beef. And our local custom plant that we haul our beef to is so backed up that we actually have our appointment for this year. We made last year in 2020, and we've already got our appointment for 2022, because if we don't, you're not going to get a beef butchered. So that tells me that there's going to be such a demand for it, and it's a niche right now, but people are coming back to the basics, and I'm really looking forward to this, and I hope it happens all over the country.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more. I have more people. We have a meats lab here at Iowa State, and obviously do it at K-State too, but we're now spending all this time helping people build local lockers. We're also helping them with the succession plans of our older locker. And you know very well that the per pound that you make on that is a heck of a lot more than if you'd sell it straight to the commodity. And so, yeah, I see it coming. I don't know how you, but anyway, we're going to see a lot more locker space, shackle space, things like that coming in this country. And it's going to be, we're still going to have, I'm going to use a bad example. Okay. So don't throw a rock at me, but it's like microbrew beer. Okay. Not that I'd ever drink any of it, but it's the, okay, I will. But anyway, the microbrews are kind of like your local beef, right? In this country, we're still going to have Coors Light, Natural Light, Budweiser, but you're going to start to see these niches start to pick up, and the local microbrew that's local, and we support our producers and our local locker, and yeah, it's going to be an interesting time.
Okay, well, very good, Dr. Thompson. We've been blessed with your presentation today and your presence, and to get to know you a little bit more. And we're glad to hear that you're going to come back to Kansas sometime and spend your later days here. So, again, thank you, and I also thank your staff that we talked to up there and getting you lined up for this. So we've been blessed with your presence today, and God bless, and stay in touch.
Thank you. See you.